Awesome. That's good. Well, welcome to what will be actually our third Denver-based World Press Freedom Day event, and we hope we can keep doing many more and raising the profile of why press freedom matters to democracy and to development. Again, my name is Susan Abbott, and I work with Africa Agenda and as an independent consultant, and I will be chairing the panel on why media rights and press freedoms are important to international development. And I'll let each panelist by giving a brief introduction about who they are and where they work and what they do. And then we will move on from that to reactions to the film. So Charles, let's start with you.
My name is Charles. Last name is Kirya. I'm originally from Uganda, and I started some kind of market entry agency just to do research for companies that want to sell their products in the African continent. And prior to that, I have a background in journalism. I was a journalist in Uganda for 6 years, working for an independent newspaper called The Monitor.
My name is Tony Shawcross. I run a nonprofit here in town called the Open Media Foundation, and one of our projects is Denver Open Media, which is a public access TV station, and hopefully soon a new FM radio station that will be entirely devoted to local music and news and content.
My name is George Bamu, originally from Cameroon. Been around the Denver area for about 20 years. I am the executive director and the founder of Africa Agenda, which is headquartered right here in the Postman Center. Africa Agenda is primarily concerned about the reporting of African news, the way global international media report African news. We think there's a problem with that, and we think that needs to be fixed. That's the mission of our organization. Thank you.
My name is Sherry Manning. I'm the founder and executive director of Friends of Enka Farms. We support farmers' education and advocacy in the Philippines, as well as environmental conservation projects there. We are also headquartered here at the Posner Center, and super happy to be a part of this panel today. I've been working in the Philippines now for a decade, and I'm going to give some stats and things when we have a moment, but I think the Philippines is often forgotten as having the very same issues that we saw in the film today. So I'm excited to represent a country that I love, and I've been an adopted member of now for a while, and to kind of share maybe not some of the best stats from the country, but why it's still important to have this conversation.
Hi, I'm Robert Uttaro. I'm an associate professor at the University of Denver Business School of International Studies. I'm a political scientist, I'm an international political economist, very interested in development issues and questions. My biggest concern, I think, when I talk about development, I think about this is, a big question that why some societies are developed and others are not. So you can see a correlation with I did my research, my Ph.D. and my research in Malawi, looking at the responses of farmers, rural farmers to structural adjustment in the structural adjustment context.
Hi everyone, I'm Marcelo Ramirez. I'm actually from the border area, so a lot of the things that you saw in the film, as many Mexican families experience, I've also experienced within my family firsthand. And I'm a student at the University of Denver, and I've been helping out Susan here at the Postman Center.
Thank you very much. Yeah, my own reaction to the film was I was thinking about all the different countries I've had both the honor and an opportunity to work on behalf of, and I actually can't think of one where a journalist hasn't been murdered in relation to media development. When I first started doing media development work, I was working in the Balkans, and as you know, we had and lived through a very terrible civil war there. And there was one case where a journalist, a very well-known journalist, was sitting in his car and the car was blown up. I've recently been working in Somalia, and of course Somalia is not exactly known for its high standards of press freedom yet, but nonetheless, media is quite important there. I've worked a lot in Jordan, but I don't think Jordan is a very interesting country where things are really quite challenging, and there's a lot of restriction, a very high amount of surveillance. Nonetheless, surrounding Jordan, their neighbors aren't known for their press freedom either, and Syria, Iraq, Egypt, etc., very high numbers of journalists who have been killed and working in very challenging conditions. I wanted to take a moment, perhaps, to think about your reactions to the film as an academic or as an activist, as an NGO, as someone who's worked both in the media as well as now working in a for-profit context. How close was this film to you as a Ugandan journalist, or from your experiences in East Africa? And were there any parallels, Charles, that you saw?
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. When I look at the map and they say there's some bit of freedom of speech in means freedom of press in Uganda. I think we have to look at is what you see and then what you hear. Personally, I've gone through that. That was in 1998. I was following up an investigative story about corruption in my home district. And after I wrote the first story, the next day, the editor told me to follow up because they wanted to find out more about it. When I arrived at the district to try to get more information, I was put under arrest, and they told me to take my shirt off, take my shoes off, and they led me to a police cell. I stayed there until evening. I contacted the monitor lawyer, and I said, hey, I've been arrested. There were no charges. They released me in the evening and told me to go home. So some people tried to solicit funds for me to file, to take the government to court, and that same night somebody came at home and said, we can't guarantee your safety. You can do whatever you want to do, but we can't guarantee your safety. I was in a situation where if I withdrew the case, they would think I took the money, but if I followed up, I was risking my family. And finally, somebody from the government came and said, hey, why don't you just leave the things the way they are, just for the sake of your family? So I decided to not write for a couple of months. And then they said, hey, do you want a job with a government newspaper? But I didn't want to compromise myself by joining the government newspaper. So when I watch the film, I know what things happen, and I know how close you are, especially when you know there's no protection. When you know that I could easily move out here. And what happens in some of these countries, they don't shoot you, but they poison you. They know where you eat, they know where so they use somebody else. They know you always go to some place to sit and have a drink. So instead of making bulletproof cars and stuff like that, you just have to watch. You only say, okay, I only have to eat at home, and I have to prepare my own food. So watching the film, I've gone through that, and I know how close it is to losing your life as a journalist in some countries.
Well, let's come back to Uganda. Tony, is there better news from the U.S. perspective, or can maybe talk about your recent work abroad?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's obviously what we are facing and risking here as journalists is very different. And I did just spend a couple weeks in Cambodia with an organization that is the main voice against corruption in Cambodia. And was really struck with just the stakes being so much higher there, and watching this film, obviously. But what came up for me is just how our press freedoms do get eroded in this country, and how we are often kind of complicit in that by just not standing up for those rights. The first time I heard Amy Goodman speak, she was in town, last week or the week before. She spoke about a time when she was in 2003 when she was interviewing people on the White House lawn, and the police were forcing her to move elsewhere. And she knew she had the right to be where she was. She knew she had the right to be interviewing people, but she was very intimidated by the police, and she allowed them to force her to stop doing the reporting that she was doing. And I remember when I was watching that, I started crying, and it reminded me of a time just maybe a few months earlier where I had done the same thing in Miami. I was there for the FTAA ministerials in 2003, and I was filming some police brutality of activists that were protesting, and a policeman told me I had to leave, and he had been following me around for a little while and had tried to rip off my press credentials at one point and pushed my camera to the ground at one point, and then told me at one point, if you don't leave now and stop filming, I'm going to arrest you. And I knew that, you know, I was just standing with the general public, and if you read any of the laws about where the press where you're allowed to film, at least you can't be restricted more than the general public. Access to space is restricted. So I knew I had the right to be there, but I still let him just kind of bully me into leaving. And when I think about someone like me or like Amy, who have actually a lot of protection and a lot of support and a lot of resources, and still let ourselves, you know, kind of just be bullied into not standing up for our rights, it does help erode the press freedom in this country. And if we don't stand up, I mean, what we're risking is so much less than what these people are risking in this film and in other countries that I've visited, and we still don't stand up for it. I don't know, that's kind of my big takeaway watching this and reflecting on that, is like, what we're risking is so little that I need to stand up for it every time it is pushed or attacked, because yeah, I mean, if people can stand up to what they're standing up to there in Mexico, we should be willing to at least do the same here.
Yeah. What about Ferguson and Baltimore? There have been some cases recently that seem reminiscent of kind of harassment against even mainstream journalists, let alone alternative or citizen media. Is that something that you've encountered or that you're aware of?
Me, personally? I mean, my organization isn't even really a journalistic organization. We exist to make sure that the public has the training and equipment and resources they need to make their own media. So my staff and I don't face that very much anymore. And I used to do a lot more reporting and journalism as we were starting the organization, but we definitely focused in on a mission of putting the power of the media in the hands of the people. That's the mission statement of the organization. So no, it's not something we face that much, although sometimes probably our community members do, but yeah, I don't even always hear about it. But the organization that used to exist to help support community members when that sort of thing arose, the Colorado Independent Media Center, and that no longer exists. So I think some of the resources available have eroded, at least in Colorado.
George, how are things in Cameroon or West Africa?
Well, before I get into that, let me just give you a quick take on what I thought about. I think one of the things that came to mind as I was watching is it reminded me of the saying that journalism is a calling. It's not really a degree or something else. Journalists have to be principled, which is what we saw in that movie. You have to have that passion to go out and report the news or whatever you're doing. And in this case, I think the information that was being put out was really information that could incite the folks that were the drug dealers, the cartels. They want to squash that information, not to let it go out. So as a journalist, when you make that commitment that you want to get into the profession, I think it has to, you have to do it for the long term. And it reminds me of my own calling into this profession. When I was growing up, I wanted to go into journalism, and my family didn't like the idea, because I think in Cameroon, journalists are one of the poorest people, except maybe you work for state media, you make a little bit. I think the average salary for a journalist in Cameroon a month is about $80 a month. And so families, that motivation to want to get into journalism is not there. So it has to be something that comes deep from your mind that you want to do this no matter the consequences. And I saw that where a lot of those guys that are putting out all this information for the newspapers, they took the hit, ultimately sacrificed, having to die in that process of putting the information. And the other thing that I noticed is that within the news organizations themselves, I think there's a debate, editorial decisions that have to be made, and that we saw that in the movie where they have to decide whose name gets on the byline, because ultimately when you put out that information, they're going to want, the cartels are going to want to identify the source of that information and want to kill that person. So they're making these internal decisions within the organization if it has to be the entire news team that gets their name on the byline or have individual journalists. I think it's something that actually challenges the profession itself, because I don't think that's something, well, I've seen that happen within news organizations here where they'll put out information, they put maybe CNN team or maybe Fox team or whatever, depending on how sensitive that information is. Well, if you make that commitment that you are going to report, I think they have to bear the byline. That's personally what I think about. And in Cameroon, or different, not just Cameroon, but different African countries where the danger of doing things like that is even much more prevalent. I think news organizations have to be determined that if they're going to put out information, they have to bear the consequences of that. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something we can talk about.
Thank you. Sherry, what was your reaction as someone who's lived in the Philippines and your other travels that you've had? Did it make an impression on you?
Yeah, it definitely did, and I think even seeing the stats at the end, the Philippines has very similar numbers. Since 1992, there's been maybe even more than this, but 77 reported killings of journalists, all for the main reasons they were writing about politics, corruption, and crime in the country. And again, that's only the ones that are reported. So I think that there's a lot of parallels, and I really appreciate what you said, George. I mean, I think that it definitely needs to be a calling, like a career like that. And as an international development worker that's working with organic farmers, that's starting to re-encourage the historical practice of seed saving and really fighting against the biotech industry in the Philippines, something that people always ask me is, oh, are you worried, Monsanto and these biotech companies are going to come after you? And my response to that is, if they're coming after us, it means we're doing our job well. So it's like a very interesting double-edged sword, I think, to speak truth to power, and know that you have to do that, or feel that you have to do that, but then to also recognize the consequences that could lead to. And I have a number of friends that are journalists in the Philippines, and one that was actually just fired because he spoke truth to power to his newspaper about some very untasteful and unrespectful reporting that was happening, in particular in the northern region of the country where we work. And his attitude is very much, well, I had to say what I had to say, and now I lost my job, but he also wasn't killed for it. So I think it's easy for us to sit here and have these dialogues when in reality that's what's really happening on the ground in a lot of the places that we work. I also think it brought up for me elections and the political end of journalism. We're in this crazy election cycle here. The Philippines is electing a new president and vice president and a number of other officials on Monday, and it's terrifying to look at the candidates and to see what could potentially continue to make maybe the Philippines not just a partially free, but a completely not free country, similar to Mexico. And so I think that it spurred and stirred up a lot for me. I also think that in a country like the Philippines, and maybe this is the case in other countries, maybe even in Mexico, I don't know, it's very regionally based where these challenges are for journalists. The southern part of the country is really where a lot of this is happening, and that ultimately is because of natural resources. The media may tell you that it's because of Muslim insurgents and things like that, but it's all because of natural resources. So I think that a lot of the issues that are impacting journalists, we don't even hear what the real issue is that they're writing about. We only hear one layer of it. Yeah.
Wow, lots to come back to and chew on that. Before we do that, however, let's finish it off with our colleagues at the end of the table.
Well, I was really impressed by, down to 2 words, courage of those reporters of that newspaper. Absolute courage that they displayed, and that they're committed to, particularly at those churches, calling them, just like to say more, to be able to know every day that this could be your fate, you could be the next person written about and see the bad end of a gun, and still being so dedicated to do that. And I think we just don't appreciate that enough, that kind of display of courage in the face of such terror. And that's the other side of this, is that there's the intimidation. Where are the other journalists? Where are the people? Where are their voices? They've been so intimidated by this that they remain silent. And it made me think about where we're heading as a world society, not just Mexico and the United States too, the intimidation. The fact that these journalists are in a way holding the last of the high, or I can say sacred ground of, a fourth estate, what it's supposed to be doing. And the rest of us seem to be willing to give that ground for safety, for personal safety. And I was thinking that even in this country, there are so many examples. The boogeyman out there that Trump likes to call the mainstream media is pretty docile. When you think of the statements that are made by politicians and there's no going after them and saying, how can you say this? For example, I'm going to build a wall and make Mexico pay for it. And I've never heard a journalist say, and just how the hell do you think you're going to do that? Do you think Mexico is a slave to America? How are you going to do it? It's just like, oh, look what he said. And I'm thinking about this time, this intimidation and who's doing the intimidating. And in our press, the intimidation is the corporation. The corporations that own the media. In Mexico, it's the cartels. They're basically a corporation too. They just have different methods, different means. And I thought, I remember Dan Rather in the run-up to the war of 2003 and all that. There was no question about why we were doing this. And he said later, after he was, fired, he said, yeah, we were told that we couldn't say anything because of patriotism. We might be unpatriotic, and hence the advertisers would feel like we were jeopardizing the bottom line by reporting the news, and hence you remain quiet. Right? You just don't question. So that's my first impression of this, is that there's so few that are holding that ground today. And there's and I wonder, how can we claim that back? How do we claim that back? Because I think there is a role for us to play, who are not journalists, who might be the reserves, if you will. But I'll leave it there.
Okay, well, this movie was released in 2012. The situation in Mexico has worsened, and what is happening is that there are 2 forms of censorship in Mexico that exist right now. That is self-censorship from the journalists themselves, and censorship from the state. I'll get onto that a bit more later. But right now I just want to talk about self-censorship. Unfortunately, what this has created is a distaste in journalists by the public, because they're not getting the information that they want, and they want to know what's going on, when it's going on, who's involved. So there's been a large distaste for journalists in Mexico, but I mean, it's a real, very big threat for them that they can be prosecuted for reporting these things. But what positives that do come out of this is that the community has come together, in essence, to make sort of what I like to call this collective communal journalism, whereby using Facebook, Twitter, Zello Radio, if you guys are familiar with it, they report where volatile activities are going on, where there's shootings, where there's violence, and tell the people to avoid there. What's also extremely helpful is people will take pictures of things and they'll write their own stories and say, like, this is my house, this is what's happening. And that's how people disseminate information between themselves. Just today, there was a shooting this morning in about 5 neighborhoods of Reynosa, which is the town where I'm originally from. And what had happened is that they have this, what's known as the light system, basically, stoplight, green light, yellow light, red light. So red light is the highest alert, and for most of today, the city was on high alert because of these shootings. Prior to that, also April 28th, there was a much larger shooting that involved much more of the public. The Marines were chasing down some narcos, and they went into a crowded mall, held the people hostage. However, the thing that really people didn't like about what happened there is that the city's usually in charge of putting out these alerts, but it didn't happen. So there's an essence there that you're asking the state, how can you help us? So the people have to take it into their own hands at this point, because there's distrust of the state and any authority in Mexico at this point.
Yeah, Scott.
So just piggybacking a little bit on Marcelo's comments about Mexico, just today I had to write a proposal about doing security workshops for civil society. And it's very much related, right? Because I was thinking about this when journalists are the ones to tell the truth, right? If that's their job, if they can't, and people start not respecting, then you have the citizens networks that Marcelo was talking about, and that starts to spread out. Well, then also spreading the violence out. So something like 2 to 3 activists are killed in Mexico every day for nothing more than what they say, not even what they do. So you actually have this I looked at, you got that color on the map, but it's actually spread down to the lowest parts of society. And there's often like no direct connection between, well, someone said something and then you can figure out why they would be killed by what narco or corrupt other force. But it's actually so deep that just speaking the truth becomes enough to get you killed, even if that particular truth is not against a particular person.
Does anyone want to respond to that? I would like to ask Professor Uttaro a question about this, actually. In my own research about media and civil society globally, the scholarship is talking a lot about trends towards illiberal democracy. And even in countries like the US that are known, at least in Western traditions, of having liberal democracy, the rise of the Trump phenomenon is indeed a rise of illiberal democracy in the United States, and a mass kind of popular need to vote popularly for an authoritarian leader, that there's actually a preference from some people to have that type of system. Is that something that you've come across or encountered in your own research or your own work?
Well, when we say illiberal democracy versus a liberal democracy, what are we really talking about? Institutional development, strong institution of liberal democracy, but a liberal democracy is a democracy that also embraces not just freedom of expression and freedom of the market, liberalism, contained state. And then illiberal democracy has weak institutional development. I think, and maybe get to the point here in the United States, I think it's about surrendering rights, surrendering institutions that are indicative of what's going on in this country. We're sliding backwards. If you look at, I hate to say it, but if you look at the presidential candidates, at least on one side, I mean, of the whole, when we had, 18 of them at one point, right? I mean, it was like, they call it the clown car. Look at who's in the House of Representatives, and look at what they're appealing to, Where does this faith in the institutions come from? Are these leaders simply taking advantage of a weakening in our faith in these institutions, and hence, what is nature, of course, a vacuum, and politics the same thing, and so we start turning to people who we think are going to, with the magic wand, are going to provide for us. And I don't think this is unique in history. I think when people get scared, or people start losing faith, they start to turn to political science. We call it the man on the white horse, right? The savior comes in and says, I'll fix it. So now we got the man with the red hair, who's coming in and saying, I'm going to fix it, I'm going to do it. I think we surrender. I don't think it's a matter of the guys running are going to create a liberal democracy, situation. I think we set the context, we set it up, and these guys are just taking advantage of it. And again, what really frightens me is how willing we are in letting this happen.
Yeah.
These, I really get worked up on this in a sense because I'm also a student of history. And I grew up at a time when, my formative years, Vietnam, protests, the political leaders and stuff. And I find myself saying, geez, I wish it was Dick Nixon. And I hated the guy. But you compare Nixon to what we're having now. We have people that are proposing a theocracy. In all but name, they're proposing a theocracy, and Americans are saying, yeah, that's what we need. Mm-hmm. We need a theocracy. It's like, have we lost sense of who we are? Have we lost sense of what we have built over all this time?
Any other reactions from the panel or from our audience? We have many people, all of you are doing interesting things in your own right. Maybe we're a small group, you might want to introduce yourselves in a minute and tell your own reactions to the film and also why press freedom may or may not matter to development. George, did you want to say something?
I think that the professor just opened a can of worms when he talked about Trump and presidential elections. I think one of the things which I noticed from my readings, especially from the so-called quote-unquote mainstream media, the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, Newsweek, CNN, Fox News, and a plethora of media. One of the things which I noticed, I think there's been increasing criticism on the manner that the United States media has handled, presented the presidential elections. I think that challenge we talked about before, escape that role that the media was supposed to play in society. They have not challenged the presidential candidates enough. I think journalists increasingly, from the reporting that I have noticed, and this is something which I wrote about recently, journalists, they've kind of taken a back seat in the whole campaign. Instead of just reporting or holding the candidates accountable, I think they've kind of taken the back seat because I think it's been said that the corporate media has been bought. There's a lot of money watching the whole process, that whole advertisement. I mean, if you look at the way, which is one reason why Africa Agenda, the organization which I run, and one of the reasons why nonprofit media, I think they've done a much better job because that influence of money is not there. So if you look at I was looking at statistics from Vox, run by Klein, and I think there's the other one, this gentleman who loves the New York Times, I found that he's on news organization. I was looking at the stats, the amount of time that has been allocated to specific candidates by the media compared to the other candidates, and then the kinds of issues that are being covered. I think journalists, that role that the media is supposed to play in the whole electoral process, I think it's been kind of relinquished. That backseat that we're talking about. The whole thing is all awash in money, which is kind of sad. I think it's sad. And the other thing that I noticed, because journalists operate within a specific environment. I think the environment, that political environment, the economic, influences what journalists do and cannot do. So that role of the media, of informing and holding candidates accountable, it's just been kind of a joke. This election cycle, I think it's been kind of a joke. And there's increasingly, I think there's an agreement from the academia, the folks who do this for a living, that the media has kind of failed the American people. From what I read.
I personally don't think the media has failed the American people. I think the American people have stopped finding information. There's information out there, but I don't think they are reading that information to be informed to make the correct decisions. As a result, they are relying on not print media, but like TV. They want to watch TV, and if a journalist doesn't ask a certain question, we think they are failed. But there's information out there about these people. There's information for people to seek this information and make informed decisions. But because we have become lazy to find this information to make the right decisions, we are starting to think that the journalists have failed the American people. But the American people have failed themselves because they don't want to seek that information. Because if you see people who are following some of these candidates, when you ask them, say why, they have no reason. They don't have the information to support. It's just like what they have been told by these candidates. They are feeding on fear. You know, it's very easy. I'm a Christian, but I always think that, you know, if you go to church and a reverend or somebody picks out certain information, it's very easy for you to give up everything you have. It's the same thing. They are playing on people's mind because people are not informed. People fail to get that information, but information is out there. Not on TV, not on radio, but it's written out there. But once people start seeking this information, I think they can make the right decision.
That's a good segue to my next question, actually. In international development, donors who are funding media projects, internet projects, building out of infrastructure, premise their investment around the idea that information saves lives, that media makes a difference somehow, that access to communication and reliable, truthful information will inform people. And putting the information out there, people will then readily seek out news and information. Do you think that perhaps the development community naively believes in the idea of a democratic media? In other words, do you think that a democratic media and press freedoms, do they make a difference to international development? Does anyone want to answer that? Charles, do you want to start?
I think to a certain level, I don't think so.
Okay.
I'll give an example of Uganda, the recent presidential elections. In rural areas where most people, that's where the voters come from, people don't have a clue of what's taking place. They don't know whether the president is a dictator. Even if you went and told them he's a dictator, he has been in power for 30 years, they don't care. And they know that if the informed people from the cities come back to the villages, they can influence these people. So what happens on the election day? They turn off all the, no access to internet, no, you can't take pictures during the voting days, and so things like this. People don't, in rural areas, when you tell them the president has been in power for a long time, you know, the only thing they care about, they don't know anything different from their poverty. The only thing they know is what the wars, the previous wars, and what's going on. So if you tell them this is a bad leader, we need to develop, they don't care about anything like that. That's the way I look at it.
Any other views?
Yeah, I think that there's as I've been thinking about it, there's a role that the media plays in society, right? We talk about international development, improving people's quality of life, helping with issues of democracy, freedom of speech. People have to speak freely in society. People have to have access to information. The primary role of the media in society is to inform the community. And when that role is not being played properly because of limitations, restrictions from governments, I think that's a bad thing. That's one of the things that I mentioned. The media has to inform the community. The second thing that media has to do is to hold politicians, hold the powerful accountable. They call it, they have to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. That's the role that the media has to play. And the other thing that I mentioned is, in other societies, maybe in Russia, communist societies, the media plays more of a negative propaganda. So that role that the media has to play in society, I think that has to be taken seriously. And then when the government or there are barriers that are placed by institutions to limit that becomes a big problem.
I'd like to make just one comment, Susan, on that. I think your question is really interesting as someone that sits as an executive director of an international development organization, and I think your question of does it matter, if there's media, I think that the best development is development that's run by the people. And so I think that maybe I would challenge the question to say, are we pushing our Western style of media on these communities as opposed to allowing these communities to have their own way that they speak truth to power and do all the things that George said. Because I think as what we're seeing happening, at least in my experience in the Philippines, the media system is modeled much more after our Western media system. And so innately, it's going to not necessarily represent the people in rural communities. But maybe the people in those communities have their own systems that they've created that look different, but they're still doing all these things that media is meant to do. And I think that as development workers, like, we have to be listening and doing our work guided by the people and the communities that we're working in. So maybe that's more of a challenge to your thought, but I think that so often you see developing nations modeling their systems after Western nations, but as we've discussed, our system is pretty broken as well. And so more indigenous types of media might actually be better.
Yeah, jump in, Scott, and then,
I love that thought, and I just want to problematize it a little bit. Right? Sure. So, in fact, having lived in countries where the news was not only not reporting anything about the so-called truth, but was basically just another department of the government, right? Having lived in those countries, what I noticed is that people were smarter than they were back here. Right? What I noticed is that people got together after work, they got together in their bar, they got together at their schools, they got together around their fields, and they argued and they debated and they came to the truth because they didn't expect somebody to give them the truth. Right? And as I watched, Trump is fascinating to me too. And the news is not about Trump. But it's fascinating in the sense of, if you expect this from the media, you have just become part of making the media a fourth sector to be captured by power, in fact. So in some ways, we're contributing to the problem. And I just wanted to add one other thing to that. Is investigative journalism an oxymoron for anybody else today? I just have trouble finding it. And the movie, right, was about honest-to-God investigative journalists who were trying to find and unearth facts. And I have so much trouble finding that.
Finding it in our current media?
In whatever the internet can lead me to, looking country after country, right? And when you do actually find something that claims to be uncovering the facts, you're not sure it's valid.
May I comment on what Scott's saying there? Because in a previous incarnation, I worked in a newspaper. And I was on the business side of it, but I was on the operating committee, so I got all the decision making and stuff that decided, where they were going to put their focus. And it's not for nothing that the newspapers and the international staffs and stuff of newspapers and television, radio, have all been cut. They've cut the what we expect the newspaper or in a sense media. They cut the heart out of it, right? So that it's all bland. And there might be something to that. But, you know, investigative journalism is, if it's not dead, it's a dinosaur. It's dying. There's very little of it. We see it. And, you know, again, we have kind of just gone along with that. But I was amazed when I worked in the newspaper how decisions were being made and for what reasons. And it really made me question. That's when I first started questioning, do we really want a free press? I mean, they advertise themselves as a free press, but I worked for a big corporation that controlled a lot of media. And they, for example, said, you know, they advertise themselves as being, well, local journalism, local control over the editorial, over the news and that stuff. But when it came time for the presidential election, we were going to endorse a candidate, and the corporate came down and said, oh, no, you don't. Everybody get in line, we're endorsing this guy. And that was one of my two lessons I learned about you know, illusions. You know, the wizard on the wall, who's behind that curtain, who's pulling the levers and stuff. And I guess that was the beginning of my
Wizard on the, that's a very frightening and sad metaphor to work from. Were there some reactions?
So doesn't social media like Facebook and, you know, all this new social media, Instagram, Twitter, doesn't that allow journalism to express their opinion freely? Isn't that another tool that journalists can use to affect and influence society?
Well, yeah, definitely, because I mean, I'm assuming like most people here have Facebook or Twitter.
Right, yeah.
So it's just easily accessible and makes it accessible to so many more people globally, so everyone knows about it. So yeah, I do agree with you. That's an extremely fundamental, like, good means of disseminating information to the public.
Yeah, because I know it sounds like I've been hearing that, you know, it seems like, you know, the media is skewed, or you know, it seems like that's the case. But you know, with Facebook and you know all these other social media platforms, it doesn't seem to give journalists the opportunity to freely, you know, express their ideas without, you know, whatever, you know, corporate or government.
No.
No.
I'm teaching a class right now called Media and Society, so your question is we're talking about this right now at CU Denver. And there's a wonderful digital ethnographer or media ethnographer named Douglas Rushkoff. And he did a film several years ago with PBS called Merchants of Cool that talked all about the corporatization of everything. And in the United States, at least, we have 6 or 7 corporations that own most media. Fast forward to today, he's just recently completed a film called Generation Like. And it's very Noam Chomsky-esque, right? It's very manufacturing of all things. And the things that you might see on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or any of that can be completely manufactured. You don't really always know who's behind it. This issue of trust is even more profound. And similarly, a lot of researchers have shown that rather than having a democratizing effect and being very pluralistic, that the digital world we're living in is actually creating little islands. And we end up just talking and liking and retweeting things that reconfirm things that we already think, rather than reading what might be uncomfortable or being exposed to things that might change our mindsets.
But it could be another opportunity, though, right, for journalists to express.
Yeah.
A tool.
But as long as some of this is controlled by governments, you can't. Because I see, for the case of Uganda, during the day of elections, the only people who were on Facebook were actually government agents. They just wanted to find out what you were talking about the government. And after the election, some of these people were arrested and they're in jail up to now. So it's not free.
In certain countries, but
yeah, it's controlled by the government.
In America, for sure, it seems like, you know, it is a great tool.
I would say that social media opens up new platforms for information to be disseminated to a wider audience, but it doesn't take away the limitations or restrictions on what can actually be said. So, for example, during our studies for my undergraduate degree in journalism, we were encouraged to take everything that was opinionated in English and off of our social media.
Oh, really?
Yes. In order to be hired for the job that they were looking for and so on and so forth. If your opinions don't match the company that you're trying to work for.
That's interesting.
But if you're trying to be like a freelancer,
Yes, sure, for alternative.
Tony, do you look at your, like when people apply to your work with you, do you look at their social media?
We do a bit, yeah. I mean, we're a free speech organization,
Right.
so it would be more to see how engaged they are and stuff than to, judge a group. And I think that just a real brief response to that, nobody thinks that that's like a bad tool. I mean, most of us agree that that helps, but when they were talking about like investigative journalism, the ability for independent journalists and stuff to be able to get the word out and tweet something that might be seen by hundreds of thousands of people doesn't make up for the fact that like that there aren't people who are getting paid to do investigative journalism anymore. That's the gap that is there.
True. Yeah, I think it's a big thing about legitimacy, because I've never heard of anyone going to Facebook to get their news. It sounds a little absurd, but it's a means of getting the news, but it's obviously not the most trusted. Like, people like to go to newspapers that they know, and certain publications like that, which are often more than not being censored by corporate interests, state interests, or interests of the company itself.
Rachel, did you want to say something?
I have a lot to say, so I don't even know where to start.
Well, just start.
Okay, let me start with social media. I think.
Yeah, tell us who you are.
Oh, my name is Lydia, and I've done research on media in Cameroon, and I've published on ethics and journalism. So I'm familiar with a lot of media issues in Cameroon. So I was talking about the social media issue. I think social media has a role to play in contexts where people lack that access and they're used as an alternative form of expression. I'll give you a recent example in Cameroon where a woman who was pregnant went to the hospital and she was pregnant with twins and she lost the babies. And her relatives thought the babies were still alive in the womb, and they asked the doctors to operate, but they didn't have money, so they said, take her to the mortuary, she's dead. And the relative got really concerned, she got away, and they operated on this dead woman and took out the kids. And this happened, the day it happened, people filmed it, and it was on social media immediately. There was no journalist reporting it, was just people videoed it and put it on Facebook and Twitter. And within 2 days, there were protests at the hospitals. And that to me just showed that there was the power of social media to spread news and to get people to move to action. And recently, the president of Cameroon, in June, wherever goes on in the country, he ordered all his ministers to go on social media, to be on social media and have a social media presence. That to me told me that he had realized the power that social media had in getting people informed without going through the official channels or even the unofficial alternative media. So that to me, there's a certain point in which social media has power in empowering people to communicate as quickly as possible. But the other problem with social media is in also silencing alternative voices. A lot of media organizations have comment sections. But when you go on that comment section and make comments, you are also attacked. So there's a risk of you being targeted and your voice being silenced because of the opinions you hold and you challenge other opinions. So there's that double-edged sword in social media, particularly for women. I've just been listening to some of the work that the Guardian has done in the UK, looking at the responses to their columns. And a lot of their female opinion writers are attacked for their opinions just because they're women. So there is that double-edged sword with social media as well, because anybody can get on the computer and there's an anonymity on the keyboard. The other issue I wanted to talk to was something George mentioned about money and also what you mentioned about institutions, the role of institutions. Now, in my work with Cameroon, what I find is when you have freedom of expression, you have all the rules and the laws out there that guarantee freedom of expression, and you lack the institutions and the market to support that media. You, in essence, create an alternative way of limiting freedom of expression. And this is what I mean. In Cameroon, there's a very, very prevalent culture of patronage in the media system. And this is where news sources and people in power pay journalists to cover them. So if you have an event, a press conference, and you invite journalists to cover your event, the journalists expect you to pay them to do that. And when you pay journalists to cover your event, you expect them to cover them objectively. And what that has, that patronage system within Cameroon journalism, I argue is that this is what happens when you create, when you adopt a liberal democracy system without the institutions to support that system. And what has developed in Cameroon is we have like 500 newspapers.
Wow.
Who reads it? I was just telling George about a newspaper that has broken up into so many factions. Like, we have a disagreement in the newsroom and I go create my own newspaper because I know that I can go to this so-and-so minister and he will pay me and I will report news in a particular angle. And that becomes my source of income. So there are no structures within the system to support the media, a free media, and that in itself curbs free expression. Granted, it's not the same kind of threats that they're facing in Mexico, but that in itself, that patronage culture in itself curbs free expression within the media.
Yeah, I really have to say that you hit the nail on the head, at least in a lot of the countries in Africa, that at the time of the adoption of supposedly liberal democracy in the early 1990s onward, by 2000, 2004, 2005, political scientists and others were just scratching their head, development agencies saying, geez, what's going on here? We haven't seemed to be broken the power of the big man or the power of the patron-clientist relations. And a scholar who I studied under, I think, hit the nail on the head when he said, you really can't have a democracy until you have a bourgeois or a middle class, because that creates the independence and the economic growth and the economic strength of society where these other independent institutions like the press can come out of. But and I think your point is so well put, when people are poor and when they depend on patron-clientelism for what little they get for their survival. We're not judging. This is, it really irritates me sometimes when people talk about corruption, because that's the code word. Corruption in Africa is patron-clientelism. My goodness, if you want to measure corruption by dollars, then there's no more corrupt government in the United States. Right? This is about survival because there isn't that economic development. And if you look, when we put this up here, if you looked at where the supposedly free or somewhat free societies, countries were in the press, they were also with large middle classes. They were very well developed. And, there's all kinds of theories on it, but I think you've said it excellently. When journalists get the brown envelope, right, here, cover the story, that's no different than a politician take what we would call a contribution, other places would call it bribe, right? And of course, they are going to, no matter what, they're going to, dance with the one who drunk them. So, we're not going to, again, maybe what I'm trying to say is, everywhere you look here, where there's no middle class, there really is no democracy. You have that illiberal or fig leaf or whatever democracy you want to call it. And you don't have a strong, therefore independent press. said that, overall, I think, you know, we could come to the conclusion that we are slipping across the board, across the world. We are slipping. I want to say something that George mentioned about information being out there, you know, but it's in the alternative media. You know, Democracy Now!, for example, is helpful. But for all the information that we could get from, say, alternative media, there's also disinformation from the other alternative media. And what is really interesting to me, and I wish at times I was a psychologist, because, you know, human beings want to go to a place that tells them they're good looking, they're smart, they're special, you know, and that. And it's no different when you have 500 channels, cable channels, and you've got all kinds of outlets of people who are even broadcasting from their basement about, you know, the news and their take on it and their opinion. And hence, you know, you start seeing people gravitate to where they're comfortable. Mm-hmm. And that kind of ties to the Emergence of Cool, which is an excellent documentary that, you know, they start to define what is not just cool, but what is news.
Mm. One self-serving thing, I mean, if we're looking for anything concrete that we could do right now, and this is incredibly self-serving, but I'm going to still mention it, you know, almost all the channels on our dial are commercial, you know, television, commercial radio. When there are non-commercial stations that are made available, over 3 out of every 4, over 75% of them tend to get claimed by churches. Not that there's necessarily anything wrong with churches, but it does affect, you know, what is happening even in the non-commercial side of the airwaves. And the Denver Open Media did recently get a construction permit and a license for a new FM station that is going to be totally devoted just to the people to make whatever content they want to make, a true public access FM radio station that's going to be devoted entirely to Denver-based content. There's 3 days left on the Kickstarter, and so if anybody wants to do anything very concrete and specific, please just take a look at the Kickstarter. You can learn a little bit more about that station. If you just go to denveropenmedia.org, you'll see info on the radio station, and lots of great rewards from local bands and local media.
Do you all know Denver Open Media? Some of you do. You might want. They have a wonderful event on the first Friday of every month, right?
Which is this Friday.
This Friday, which is so cool. Go down, see art on Santa Fe Boulevard, but also I mean, I grew up here, and I can't even believe how much Denver has changed since I was a kid. It's both for good and bad, right? And our local media has changed. I mean, in all of the countries I've worked in, it's always about hyper-local media makes a difference. In some countries, people have access to 200 to 600 satellite channels, no problem. But when it comes to accessing media and information about what's happening in their own backyard, no one knows where to go. And I'm finding more and more that the media development places I work in Denver are starting to really resemble that. One recent episode is the forcible removal of homeless people in downtown Denver. It's an issue that I live in downtown Denver, so I follow it very closely. And 1 minute you have a tent city, and the next day they're being rounded up. And the question I have is, where was our local media? And what happened to them? Westward seemed to be one of the few media outlets locally that you could find information about it. And I mean, not to, you know, just make it about Denver, because we're talking, but I guess the point is that press freedom matters most to those of us where we live in our local immediate surroundings, whether we're in the Philippines, Nigeria, Mexico, Cameroon, Uganda, wherever. And Denver provides a great opportunity through Tony's organization. And I think I've always slightly hoped that our international development groups could work more with you. I don't know if there's a way to do that. But I guess a way to start would be going down on Friday and checking you out.
What's it called? It's called Denver Open Media, and the website's denveropenmedia.org. And if anyone has any content they'd want to be on the radio station, if you bring it down on Friday for the first Friday event, anytime between 1 p.m. and 10 p.m., you get a free $100 membership, which also gets you free access to the computer labs and software and other things for a full year.
You said you do Kickstarters as well?
well, there's a Kickstarter specifically for, we do help some client nonprofit organizations do Kickstarters, but after the way this was going, I don't know how well that'll work. But there's 3 days left on the Kickstarter to help launch this radio station. So that's my plea. And if you're interested in it and can't give, even just sharing it on social media, Facebook, or whatever, really does help. So we're hoping to create some real buzz in the last 3 days, and I would appreciate people at least checking it out, watch the video, see if it's something you think you would be supportive of.
Yeah, and your plug for Denver Open Media and the Kickstarter campaign is a really nice segue to a few other things I wanted to highlight and hear people talk about as we close off the formal part of our discussion. One is that the Alliance Center downtown is starting a new initiative called Truth in Media, which Denver Open Media is part of, together with about, 5 to 7, 8, 10 different so-called alternative media. That's a question. I say so-called because I'd like to know more what that term means. But alternative media, alternative to the mainstream commercial. And right in our backyard, if you're interested, you can. They're not just looking for media outlets to be involved, but consumers, citizens, nonprofit organizations, academics. And it's about media literacy, digital literacy, and elections especially. And how do we hold people to account, and who do we trust, and where do we get our news and information? And if you're doing social justice work, if you're trying to do something for the social good, how does the media cover that? And so if you would be interested in getting involved in this, I'd be happy to put you in touch with the organizers. The second is that, George, maybe you can share your papers now. We wanted to use the occasion of World Press Freedom Day in Denver to launch an idea for a media and art kind of related project. And the idea is, between now and the next 6 to 12 months, we would like to ask people when they're traveling to other countries or even around the US, if you could grab some newspapers or periodicals, magazines, and give us the front covers of them. And especially if it's a cover that depicts development issues or an issue that's particularly important to your NGO, like farming, of course. It's both a development issue, but it's what you're working on. If Monsanto's the headline, great. If Enka Farms is even better. But what we want to do is collect as many images of what does media really look like from the perspective of the places we're living or working, visiting, etc. And at the end of our experiment, we're going to have a big exhibit where we're going to hang up the papers and just let people walk around and see them and be immersed in them and let the images tell their own stories. How is all of the stuff that we think about and care about deeply, how does it get portrayed? What does the business person have to do? How does development look in newspapers around the world?
Do you guys have a Facebook?
Africa Agenda has a Facebook. Yeah.
AfricaAgenda.org?
Yes.
And a WhatsApp?
And maybe we could partner with Denver Open Media on this, and Jean-Pierre, this is my shameless plug. Maybe we can partner with your organization, One Earth Future, which you might want to say a few words about. But JP's been working primarily in East Africa, right? Also in Uganda before One Earth Future, right? But maybe we could partner with your organization and try to not just talk about press freedom, but really look at what does the media cover in the countries that we work in.
Yeah, and I'll just plug as well.
Okay.
So I've been listening to you guys talk, especially about, so you brought up the idea of nonprofits, and my organization, the One Earth Future Foundation, doesn't think of itself as a journalism institution, but we do release research reports, and today actually we released our annual State of Piracy report, and if you go on to oceansbeyondpiracy.org, check it out. Actually, Open Media built a website for us a couple years back. But I think that we're filling this gap where the investigative journalism is not happening anymore. We're doing independent research, and we're attacking issues that aren't being covered in the press, notably their welfare. The ocean's a wild place still, and nobody's really telling that story. And once you get in there, like the Gulf of Guinea, 70% of these entire incidents go unreported. But once that news is out there, then the mainstream media, like BBC or whoever, catches onto it, and then it's the story. So I mean, I see it as our responsibility to kind of unearth that story, and then the mainstream gets greater exposure. So yeah, check out that website and check out my videos.
What's the second?
It's called oceanbeyondpiracy.org. There's Twitter for that one. Yeah.
I'm a social media guy.
This is fantastic. We're going to co-op you into something. My next announcement is, in case you don't know, Denver's going to host this year's Online News Association annual conference, which is kind of a big deal. I don't know if you've ever been to it. If you have, you'll know why. But Africa Agenda is hopefully going to work with some colleagues in Nigeria at Lagos State University and perhaps other places. And we would really like to partner with anyone in Denver at the Posner Center, at One Earth Future, Denver Open Media, on the idea of having so-called north-south exchanges between journalists in African countries and the U.S. It could be community media, could be print, TV, radio, etc. We are looking to put together some proposals related to this and send them to various donors in the next few weeks. So if that's something you would be interested in taking part in, we would really love to work with you on that. And then finally, Africa Agenda runs an annual event called the State of the Africa Summit, right?
Right, and Africa Summit, State of the Africa Summit.
Yes, and we are in the process of gearing up to plan for that, right?
Right, we have our next annual event is in October this year, and we will send out an announcement. If we get your information, we'll send out an announcement to let you know about it coming up September of this year.
It's the greatest.
And then finally, this summer in July, Posner Center will host something called the Poverty Hackathon. And Sherry, did you take part last year?
I didn't.
Okay. Has anyone been at it? I didn't go, but I've been at hackathons. Do you all know what hackathons are? It's kind of fun. It's a fun opportunity to problematize and come together in a community kind of context around different types of issues. Africa Agenda is going to be one of the organizations in the hackathon. The other organizations are
Women's Bakery.
Yeah.
And I don't remember the third name. Oh, Starfish.
Starfish. Oh, they work in Guatemala,
Yeah.
with schools in Guatemala. And Africa Agenda's challenge is relevant to World Press Freedom Day because, George, why is it? Because we're looking to think of new ways of developing Africa Agenda's website, its portal, its online platform. We'll have different mobile app developers, social media activists, Code for America, various types of people who work in the hackathon environment. But it's not just exclusive to programmers and technologists. It's also inclusive of social justice, NGO, academics, etc.
One other thing that I'd like to add to that, Susan, is one of the things we haven't talked about is training for journalists. And I had the opportunity this afternoon before I got here. I spoke with one of my friends who was a Mastercard scholar at Michigan State University, and I said, what are some of the peculiar issues that journalists in Cameroon face? And one of the things that he told me was that in Cameroon, a lot of people don't trust journalists because everybody can say that they're journalists. And he said that there are a lot of quacks in the business. Quacks, these are people who say they're journalists, but they're not journalists. They're not actually practicing the profession, so people are afraid to talk to them. And one of the things that is key to our organization is training. One of the reasons Africa Agenda exists is because we are critical of the way that African news is presented by global media. We think there's a problem with that, the way that news is presented, and we think journalists need to add context, perspective to the news that is reported. You can't just pick the whole African continent with a brush. So that has to do with training. How are news organizations in the United States and around the world training their journalists to report about the African continent? Do they know about the African continent? Or is it what we call parachute journalism? You can have Anderson Cooper flying to an African country one night, gather the news report, and then the next night he's out reporting, he's back here reporting on the news. We think journalists need to be trained to understand the local communities, and we think that's really important.
Okay, before we wrap up, yeah.
Didn't everybody else have something? Can I jump in?
Yes.
My name's Abigail. I'm the lead organizer at Hackers.
Oh, great.
We're a non-profit global community dedicated to bringing journalists and technologists, developers, designers, coders, and just make them work a little bit more closely together. And we do that through regular community events. We're doing an LA event this year. Our next event is May 25th. And it's all about social media, and I know we have quite a few social media fans here today, so I thought it would be really good if some of you would come along. What we're focused on is building relationships on social media, making sure that everybody has a voice, and we're partnering with the Journalism and Women's Symposium for this event, which is dedicated to getting women into media and giving them a voice. So if you're interested, Google Hackers Colorado, or you can find me on Twitter. Sorry, really quickly. It's hacks as in journalists, and then hackers as in coders. Hackers Colorado. Yeah, on Twitter we're Hackers CO, or you can find me, I'm Abigail Edge. I'm going to have to leave fairly shortly, but if you have any questions on that,
Where will the event be?
it's at Above Syntax on South Broadway, which has a really nice event space, and also does really good cocktails, which are
They have a wonderful meetup page. Maybe that's how I found you.
Maybe it is. Yeah, Meg actually emailed me and said that I should speak to you. So
Oh, great. No, it's, Denver has a really exciting community. I don't have to tell you that, but sometimes we don't just get together and talk and meet each other. And it's, slightly, I think, that through events like this, we can find ways to work together, build partnerships. Many of you are working at nonprofits, maybe at slightly different nonprofits. But if you are looking for help, ideas, if you have projects you want to launch, I think, let's come together and support each other's work. Any closing thoughts from our panel? Maybe say a few words, things that you're looking for help on, your takeaways from this World Press Freedom Day event.
One question about that. Could you email some of the sites and name things that we contact for follow-up?
Sure. Yeah, if you want to be on a distribution list and get information of the people here, providing you're okay with that and give your consent, we'll distribute that, as well as info on the meetup group for Hacks and Hackers, as well as all of the other resources, how to donate to Denver Open Media's Kickstarter. And maybe Ingrid, you haven't plugged your work, so since we're plugging work, Ingrid works with the UN Foundation, right? Or you were working?
United Nations Association.
Yes, okay. As a volunteer. Is that still going?
Yes, we have our new vice president here. And I'm actually not the president anymore, so.
Okay. What's coming up with your work at the UN Association?
Well, I'd say one of the things that we're a part of, and I know Postman's one of our partners, is Women Powering Change, the big event that's happening in July. And Denver, through UNA, we're pushing for CEDAW, to have a local CEDAW city ordinance.
Oh, what kind of ordinance?
Well, CEDAW is an international UN treaty for women's rights and gender equity, and so it's an initiative that UNA is working on.
That's fantastic. Well, we've all plugged something, but in the spirit of of ending on time and also giving respect to our panel. Thank you all for coming. Can you just close us out and say some concluding remarks in summary? What's your key takeaway or wish for the crowd?
I think that the public we need to do much so that the public can start trusting journalists again. I think people have lost trust in what's coming out or what we are reporting. I think we need to gain that trust back from the public.
Okay, Tony.
Nothing I didn't already say. I think we all need to not let what press freedoms we have here be eroded and look for opportunities locally to support local media and engage in local media.
Okay.
And I think the issues that we saw in the video, they don't exist just in Mexico, even right here in the United States. And it exists here in the United States in a different form, where that access to information. One of the big issues that I really have is there's gatekeepers within news organizations here in town. This quote unquote mainstream media. Sometimes it's very difficult to reach local mainstream media because it's information that doesn't benefit their profit agenda. We just have to call it what it is. It doesn't benefit. They'll rather have us watch Britney Spears or watch Miley Cyrus and all the other stuff, which doesn't really help the community very much, instead of giving access to information which will benefit the community. So I think we have to be bold to say what is it that is going on that needs to be fixed in the community. That access to information, we need access to real information so we can know what's going on.
I'll pass.
Okay.
I'd say is the bedrock of democracy rests on transparency and accountability. And this is why we must strengthen standing behind a free and independent press. Without that support, the erosion that has been taking place for decades now continues. And we're impoverished by that because while the power structure is benefiting greatly from this erosion, we are losing a lot. So we need to have this support of the independent and free press and demand it. And that's only going to happen if we demand it and say, let's have the press do what they're supposed to do.
Well, yeah, in honor of World Press Freedom Day, go out, celebrate your freedom, don't take it for granted, and don't let it be eroded away, as many of our speakers have so eloquently put it tonight. And thank you very much for all coming to this.
Thank you.
Thank you.